Everybody, welcome to this episode of Think Business Live. Looking forward to talking with Jason Haddock. Jason, it's great to connect with you. With Sozo Labs, you're the CEO, and I want to read your bio real quickly because I think it just says a lot, and there's a lot that I want to dive into. You are the CEO of Sozo Lab, a tech company that builds immersive applications for education, occupational training, and soft skills training. You developed a passion for innovation in the tech space at a very young age, and for the last 3 decades, you've been at the forefront of emerging technology. During this time, you founded and led several successful tech companies in various fields. You've served as both the CEO and CTO to health tech and gaming companies, headed up a business intelligence division at a software company, founded a big data and AI conference, and held development and IT roles in fintech. The multi-sector experience led you to your current role as far as educational VR. And your business, Sozo Labs, which can be found at sozolabs.com, is talking about a world where you partner with amazing organizations to build VR and AR solutions, immersive apps, and gamification. And so I really want to kind of dive into this. And as a business coach, one of the things I do is I work with people around the globe who are successful but stuck, and I work with them to get unstuck. I love this show because I get to have guests like you to help them get unstuck. I think many people are stuck on what all of this even means and how to make it apply to their business today. So how can a company get unstuck when it comes to everything we just talked about?
Okay, well, we just talked about quite a lot. So firstly, thanks for having me. I'm quite excited to have this conversation and see where it goes. But I'm assuming you're talking about the kind of technologies of augmented and virtual reality.
Correct.
And how companies can embrace those. And I've had the fortune of this being my second time around. So I first got involved in virtual and augmented reality back, in 2014, 2015, 2016, when it was a big buzzword. It was Oculus had just released their first headset, and everybody thought that it was going to take over the world, much like Pinky and the Brain. And obviously that didn't happen, and there were some spectacular failures. But in the type of software that we built, I left the gaming company having, mixed experiences with this technology. So I think at the time, a lot of marketing companies were really promoting this technology as a gimmick to try and attract people like bugs to a bug zapper by kind of waving shiny technology at them. And I felt a bit disillusioned. But right as I took the obvious career move from a technology company into a human genetics company, I worked on one last piece of technology, which was to essentially train people how to, or to identify people who were training to work at heights. And it in retrospect, it was such an incredible experience. So we talk about getting unstuck. When we started that project, the company that we worked with, which was a big steel manufacturing company, really didn't know what they wanted. They just had a very visionary chief learning officer who was saying, I know there's something in this VR thing, and I'd like to use some of it, which is never really the best way to adapt technology into your organization. Generally, you need to find a problem and make sure that technology can solve it. So that's exactly what we did. We said, tell me your biggest problem. And he said, well, my biggest problem is we train people to work at heights. And it's quite a male-dominated industry, so therefore there's a big macho factor. And when we ask people to tell us if they have a fear of heights, people generally don't come forward. And we've identified a number of people who've gone through this training and haven't been able to finish it because they suffer from vertigo. And the problem is, due to safety regulations, we have to train these people for 6 of the 8 weeks before we can take them up and see if they have vertigo. And we end up spending a lot of money training people that can't use the training. And the frustrating thing is that we have a viable alternative for people who want to work on the ground. So I conceptualized what is the Harry Potter sorting hat of training. And we didn't even know it was possible at the time, but we developed a system using biometric sensors, virtual reality, and even constructed this whole haptic environment. So the idea was that we modeled this blast furnace. So it was the highest building in the steel manufacturing plant, 190 meters off the ground. And we modeled the exact replica and got someone to essentially open the lift doors, get into the lift and go up 190 meters and then step out of the lift, and they were completely exposed. So the return on investment here was, obviously the project worked, but the return on investment was that they paid for the entire development in the first 8 weeks. And I've been in software for a very long time, and I can't count on my one hand the number of projects that had that dramatic a return on investment. And the reason for that is that we found a technology solution to fit the problem. And the problem in this case was, how can we tap into that immersive experience, that real sense of feeling that people feel when they experience vertigo? And we were able to channel that. And not surprising, quite unsurprisingly, people couldn't tell the difference between the real world and the virtual reality world. Yeah. And it was so fascinating to see how this played out, because the experience when we did the initial research and testing, we got an A, B, and half the group suffered from vertigo and half didn't. So we used that to test our hypothesis. But it was interesting. You walked into a room with carpet on the floor, and when these people went up to 190 meters and the door opened, they were on their hands and knees. Now, if you think about it, you're feeling carpet under your hands, but yet your brain will not let you kind of realize that you're actually on your hands and knees on a floor in an office on the ground. Your brain tells you you're 190 meters in the air. So it's in terms of this technology, I think that revelation for me was that there's a place for this type of technology in learning and development.
Yeah, it's really amazing. I remember doing virtual reality years ago, and I was like, I was flying through New York, with like these rocket things, and when I would hit a building, I would like almost fall down. I mean, it was really bizarre, and I went up in an elevator, and they opened it up 100 floors up, and they put donuts at the end of like this plank. I couldn't do it, and then I finally crawled there. It's amazing what it does to the mind. But I appreciate how you're talking about how you're working with people who and getting around many of the things that you talked about. Let's work backwards for a minute. You're talking about gamification. What is that? When you talk about gamification, how do you mean, and how can companies really start incorporating gamification into their world?
Gamification in its own right is a very big subject, and I'm actually just about to write an article in Forbes about it, because I had a really interesting experience, which I'll share. But I think the biggest thing about gamification is not to get confused by the first kind of four letters. Gamification isn't just taking games and applying it to a business process and thinking that you've made that business process more fun. I think a lot of people are under that misconception, and probably still are. But for me, gamification is it's human behavior. It's behavioral dynamics. So kind of the same rules that we apply to behavioral economics apply to gamification. And it's understanding that human beings are motivated in essentially kind of on two axes. So one is that we all have this aspirational idea about change. We all want to go to gym to be healthier, eat healthier. We want to lose weight. We want to finish that PhD or that MBA. And we always have this long-term aspirational goal, but many of us don't get there because we're missing the short-term dopamine hits that get us on that kind of journey. So there's this concept of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. The extrinsics is the things that motivate us to get started. It's like they call it habit stacking and nudges and all these terms are used. But if you just do the nudging without there being this aspirational reason to change, you're never going to change. You're going to do what, you know, kind of the gambling industry does, which is they just hit those short-term dopamine hits and people get hooked on that, but there's no positive outcome. At the same time, we also motivated in two ways. So some of us are motivated very positively. So, you know, we're motivated because it's the right thing to do, or we're motivated because it's going to make a difference. But most of us are motivated negatively. So, you know, fear of missing out, loss avoidance, all of these types of things. So gamification is just really understanding how human beings work and designing systems that influence positive behavior, and understanding that people are unique and generally behave in different ways, and being able to adapt a lot of the technology that the gaming industry has discovered by nature of the different player types and how they're motivated. So, you know, some people, we call them killers because they just want to get in there, they want to win. They're like the type A hyper competitive people. And if you're developing gamification solutions, you need to build things in that are going to motivate them. Some of us, the type Bs, we like to explore, we like to socialize, you know, we like to complete things. Each of those categories of people, the gaming world they build solutions to motivate those individuals. And gamification is essentially taking all of that stuff and applying it to a business process. And my biggest advice to companies when they ask about gamification is saying, you know, you've got to be very careful about what you're applying gamification to. Because if you don't apply gamification to the right thing, in other words, if the underlying process isn't correct, all you're going to do is you're going to make it exponentially worse, because gamification almost accelerates the adoption of a process. And if it's a bad process, you're accelerating the adoption of that bad process. And often it's, you know, it becomes too late to do anything about it if it's not the right process.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question. When it comes to some of these companies that you're seeing online doing recurring monthly, programs, they're building communities, people are coming in to learn. How do they gamify?
So I think Duolingo is a good example. There's simple mechanics. Duolingo uses the streak mechanic. So it's loss avoidance, because I lose my streak. Oh no, I have to start all over again. So it keeps someone motivated. And that's the extrinsics I talked about. That daily little dopamine hit of I've maintained my streak, I've maintained my streak, I've maintained my streak. But the intrinsic is I'm learning a new language. And there's a big reward for me at the end of this journey is suddenly I'm going to be fluent in Spanish or French. But if you think about it, just learning a language is a really, really significant task. So a lot of people had aspirational ideals to learn languages and they never learned them. And what gamification has done is it's kind of nudged us along to the point where we're starting to see the impact or the effects of our learning. And then suddenly we're kind of becoming self-motivated to continue on that journey. I think that's a very good way that gamification is being used. But there's also very many bad ways that gamification is used as well.
Yeah. All right. I appreciate you sharing all that. Let's just kind of rewind for a minute, because you've been successful in this field for a long, long time. And so, if we go back, 25 years and, Netscape first came out and, a scrolling thing across the screen was a big deal. And fast forward and Facebook becomes Meta, there's a big push to the meta world. And I think there's so many advantages for business, but like you said, it can be used for the wrong way. So I think there's also a lot of fear around this world too, right? Like, I think people are also feeling like even more disconnected now. We see our kids disconnecting. They're always on, their phones, their iPads, as are adults as well. And so now when we talk about virtual reality, kind of like escaping to a virtual world, you mentioned Oculus earlier and things of that nature. Where do we, how do we get through the fear and how do we use it responsibly?
So the fear part, I think, is a growth mindset approach, and I think that we've always been afraid of new technologies, and whether it's the internet and people not wanting to use the internet because their information is suddenly going to be online, whether it was payment transactions on the internet and worrying about our credit card information being on the internet, we've always adopted technology with a fear approach first, and only through like embracing that technology and going through the trials and tribulations, because I'm not going to deny that there are a lot of bad things on the internet. There is a lot of fraud on the internet. But it's only through adopting and embracing technology that we kind of see the patterns of behavior and can address those patterns of behavior. Now, I'm when it comes to the safety part, I think that going into any new technology, not learning from your past experiences is it's naive and dangerous. So we've, a lot of people, when they think metaverse, they think some new fantastical technology, but the best way to describe the metaverse is we went from the original text-based browsers, which we called Web 1.0, to the social media world, where we suddenly started to have more of a conversation online. And that conversation was not only with other people, but suddenly with brands and institutions and things that we would never been able to converse with before. And what we're seeing now is what they're calling Web 3, which is a more immersive way to experience the web, a more decentralized way to experience the web. And it's not a revolutionary new technology, in my opinion. It's more of an evolutionary new technology, and it's going to slowly materialize around us.
Yeah.
It's not like you're going to wake up tomorrow and find out that you're plugged into the matrix. It's going to happen very slowly.
Right. Yeah. All right. Good. Well, thank you for that. So a quick speed round. Jason, what's a book that's had a book or a TED Talk that's had the biggest impact on you?
I think by far it's a very old book. It's a book by a guy called Peter Singer, and it's called The Fifth Discipline. And it was one of the first books where I felt that I had this massive, massive aha moment. Because it talks about leadership. It talks about leading in complexity, which is a reality of every single thing we do. I mean, the world is only getting more and more complex.
Yeah.
And it was the first book that introduced me to the concept of systems thinking and understanding that some systems are so complex that you can't fix them, which was a bit of a dilemma for me because I was an engineer and I like to fix things, and finding out there were these wicked problems in the world that couldn't be fixed was a very frustrating experience. But what was a great learning out of that is understanding that in order to understand complexity, you have to kind of see things as systems and know how to essentially know where the levers are in that system to kind of change its behavior. And that's why I'm fascinated about things like gamification and immersive technology, because these are all addressing complex problems in the world we have today.
Yeah, I love it. Best piece of wisdom you've ever received?
Best piece of wisdom I ever received was a very young age. I was working for a bank, and I was going to be my own investment broker, and I was going to be super rich and super successful. And I was working with a investment broker across the table. So I thought, well, here's a great idea. Let me ask him what I should invest in. And instead of answering the question, he asked me a very strange question in response. He says, do you have 6 hours a day available? And I said, what do you mean? He says, well, do you have 6 hours a day to study the markets, read up reports, look into instruments, understand, volatilities and all of this stuff? And I said, no, of course not. I'm a software developer and I want to write code. So he says, well, why wouldn't you trust someone who does have 6 hours a day to spend researching the market? And I went, okay, never mind.
That is so good. That is really, really good. Yeah, that's a good one. I love that. Oh, that's a great one. Finish this sentence. What's one thing every organization can do to get more connected to VR, AR, gamification, and everything that we talked about today?
Follow me on LinkedIn and visit Sozo Labs. No, just kidding. I would say just buy a VR headset and put it on your head. Just try the technology. It's not daunting. It's not expensive anymore. It's like, $250 and you can have a VR headset. And trust me, table tennis in VR will change your life.
Yeah. So it's really cool. I bought an Oculus about 1.5 years ago. And it's really, really cool. It's really, really cool. Mm-hmm. And so I'm glad I did it, because I wanted to get more kind of entrenched in the VR world. So no, I would agree. Do one thing. Jason, this was great. Tell everybody who your ideal clients are and where they can also just kind of connect to you. I know I mentioned your website earlier, sozolabs.com, but tell everybody who your ideal clients are.
I think our ideal clients are probably mid to large size corporates who are looking at training large numbers of people and are looking to make that training more impactful. We have the ability to create training that exactly mirrors the environment that people are going to be working in and has the same challenges that they will face in that environment. So we can adapt and tailor experiences that are unique to your organization and the challenges people face going into your organization. And we're doing some pretty interesting stuff with everything from diesel mechanics through to somatologists. And if you're wondering what somatologists are, they're beauty therapists. So yes, even they are learning in VR.
That's great. I love it. I think VR is going to be a big piece when it comes to, like you talked about today, training and learning. And, I know a lot of talk with a lot of the companies, like the DTEs of the world, instead of having people go up on poles and learning, they're doing it virtually. And there's a lot of amazing things where maybe the training used to be dangerous, and now through VR, they can do it really effectively. Yeah.
Safety is the number one use case. There were over 130,000 injuries in 2022 that were all related to just training, like lack of training.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I appreciate you taking time to be on the show today and educating everybody on this topic. I'd love to have you back again, because I think it's something that it's going to take a lot to sink in. One of my favorite books is Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey Moore. I don't know if you read that, but I read it 25 years ago, and it's so relevant today. You have your early adopters and then you have your laggards. And I think this is going to be one where the late adopters and, which is when the majority of the market pick things up, because it's still new, but it is really important. Think community. If you are not incorporating this in some way into your business, or have a plan to figure out how you can put any of the things we talked about, just spend 1 minute a day or 2 minutes a day researching it a little bit. Listen to some Blinkist books on it. Follow Jason on LinkedIn. Put in your calendar to study it 1 or 2 minutes a day, 3 days a week. It really will compound and take you far. Jason, I appreciate it. Again, everybody, you can reach Jason on LinkedIn or sozolabs.com. You can reach me at jondwoskin.com. Jason, this is a pleasure. I appreciate you calling in from the UK, and have an amazing day. Think community. Thanks so much, Jason. Thanks so much.
Thanks, John.